I'm currently in one of the most remote places on planet Earth. I'm nearly 2,000 kilometers away from the next island and over 3,700 kilometers away from the next continent. This is a place that's fascinated me and the rest of the world for centuries. It's home to what is undoubtedly one of the most captivating tales in human history. Now, what I really want to talk about is the challenges facing the island and its inhabitants today, to understand them, to look the issues in the face, and to talk to the people. But to forego telling you of the context and history in which this island came to be in the first place, will be starving you with one of the most compelling stories of human civilization. So let's start there. This is Rapanui, or as it's better known in English, Easter Island. Around 1200 CE, the Polynesians arrived here as a part of their last wave of migration across the Pacific. For the next 450 years or so, the society experienced relative success, growing to an estimated 9,000 strong in population and famously embarking on one of the most unique building projects in the history of the world. You all know it. These.
All about the island, guarding an unknown past, are speechless sentinels, huge, hulking giants of stone.
Now, believe it or not, there's been 887 of these statues discovered across the island. It's thought that they were built to represent ancestors, chiefs, and important people, and that the effigies would provide spiritual energy known here as mana. Mana was said to secure prosperity and survival for the Rapanui people and would make the crops grow and the fish jump willingly into the nets. The biggest ever erected stood at 33 feet tall and weighed 75 tons, and the biggest ever carved, El Gigante, never left the quarry and was 75 foot tall and weighed an insane 182 tons, which is roughly the same as two 737 Boeing planes. Towards the end of the 17th century, religion on the island had progressed, and the Rapanui people no longer had faith in the power of mana obtained through the Moais. This loss in faith was more than likely due to the hardship suffered by the people as the ecosystem began to fail. There are various different theories as to how this happened, one being the oversimplified idea of Rapanui-induced ecocide as the race to cope with the demands of a growing population. So overzealous tree cutting and slash and burn tactics, to uncontrolled rat proliferation, most likely introduced by the original Polynesians, which, with vast resources and no natural predators, voraciously decimated the environment. One of the consequences of being on a subtropical island is that it can start raining pretty heavy at any moment, and that is what's just happened there. So I've just been caught up in a storm. Now, I didn't plan on finishing this section indoors, or in fact in an entirely different country here in my home of Manchester, but getting caught up in a storm 3 times in a row trying to finish that segment meant we had to change plans. So where were we? The ecosystem was collapsing, times were hard, and people stopped believing in mana and the power of the Moai. So let's continue. By the time the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen made first European contact on Easter Sunday of 1720-22, the island's population had settled to around 3,000. Upon their first interaction though, Roggeveen's men killed 10 of the island's inhabitants in an unprovoked attack. A sign of what was to come for the Rapanui people as the world started knocking on their door. Middlesbrough's own James Cook arrived in 1774, speaking of poorly kept wooden tools and boards, and most importantly noting that there were no trees on the island. Evidence that the ecological collapse was very much taking its toll. The society continued to dwindle in number, and things weren't helped by the arrival of Peruvian slave traders in the 1860s that captured 2/3 of the island's population. Amidst international pressure, some of the islanders were returned, bringing with them a slew of diseases like smallpox, tuberculosis, and syphilis. By 1877, there was just 111 Rapanui remaining. Seeing an opportunity, Rapanui's closest country, Chile, successfully annexed the island, promising protection and support. But over the next 70 years, Chile began to exploit the land as an asset, leasing out the island as a sheep farm to Scottish company Williams and Balfour & Co. The islanders were ushered into a small section, creating the now capital Hangaroa, and fenced in, not even allowed to roam the rest of the island without a prior permission slip. They didn't have freedom of movement, passports, or voting rights, so they were essentially second-class citizens in their own land. After successfully campaigning, the Rapanui were granted civil rights in 1966, and since then have had multiple run-ins with the Chilean government. Most notably in 2010, 12 and 15, where the Chilean government were widely criticised for coming in heavy-handed.
Police on Easter Island raided the grounds of a luxury hotel this past week to evict the last of dozens of indigenous protesters battling for ancestral lands and a larger share of profits from the tourists who come to see the mysterious statues of giant heads.
Denied their land rights and political freedom, tensions between the Rapanui and the Chilean government have reached boiling point.
The state keeps its grip on this island through violent means.
The anti-Iraqi was met with a hail of rubber bullets.
If Chile leaves, we'll be much better off. The Rapanui will have a better quality of life, because right now, I can tell you our standard of living is very low.
So now you've had the context of the island, where does that leave us today? Well, I wanted to see if their dark past has shaped their view of the Chilean state, of tourism, of globalization, and their relationship to the influences of the outside world. And I wanted to get a feeling and an understanding of the worries and concerns of the people living within this forever threatened and delicate community in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So to find that out, let's go back to the island, shall we?
Yorana.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How you doing? Good to see you.
Right, yeah, good to see you.
My first friend on the island was Marc. Born in New Zealand, Marc moved here for love, and because of this, has had the unique and often difficult experience of trying to integrate into the Rapanui culture.
When I came here, it was more of a shock than I thought it would be. The people they weren't sure about me. There was a lot of testing, as it were, the uncles seeing how far they could kind of push me, and my wife's grandmother was the manager of the best football team on the island, Hangaroa, and of course as her grandson-in-law I had to play for that team, and I was a fairly decent player. The funny thing was though, it didn't matter what happened on the field, I was always the one to blame. You know, something could happen on the other corner of the field and they'd turn around to blame the gringo. Yeah, a few of the aunties were like that too. You know, they're just talking to me in a real kind of demeaning way, and I just turned around and said, are you talking to a dog or something? Is there a dog here? I don't see a dog here. Rapanui people avoid conflict with each other, and I do find that there's a number of tourists that have had problems on the island just because Rapanui will sometimes turn their frustration, because you live alongside people here, it's really difficult. So if I have a fight with someone here on the island, I've got to see that person for the rest of my life. Whereas I know that this tourist is going the next day, and I think
This idea of hostility between the Rapanui and tourists wasn't new to me. Look online and you can find dozens of cases of supposed mistreatment.
Apathetic, indifferent, unfriendly. They make us believe that we have come to bother. I'm sorry they have this kind of treatment for tourists.
Rude staff wanting to rip you off and fine you for every little thing, getting overly aggressive at times. Do not go here if you care for your life.
We all know the islanders are unpleasant, but living it is something else.
Unfortunately, the people from Rapanui leave a lot to be desired.
We saw how Rapanui people gave insults and vented their hatred against the tourists.
It is unfortunate that such a beautiful place is stained by so many people who really mistreat tourists.
Today's video is focused on one of the most negative experiences of my life, and by far the most negative travel experience I've ever encountered. End of August.
Recibimos muchísimos mensajes de personas diciendo que habían tenido altercados similares con personas trabajando en Isla de Pascua y que habían sentido que les habían faltado el respeto de una forma tremenda. Entonces es evidentemente algo que pasa siempre y que todos callan, nadie lo dice.
What struck me upon hearing the countless negative experiences of travellers worldwide was the potential damage to reputation for xenophobia could garner for an economy heavily reliant on tourism. a reliance on tourism that was exposed during the difficult period of COVID-19.
So there's only really two options on the island. You can either work for the government or work in tourism. Tourism is the only thing that generates money on the island. Everything else, you're just being paid by the Chilean taxpayer. Before the pandemic, my understanding is we were getting up to sort of 130,000 people a year. 2 flights a day for a town of this island of 8,000 people. It's pretty lucrative. But with the pandemic, we lost everything. Everything shut down, and that was the only time I wished I was actually in government work.
150.000 turistas al año es lo que recibía la isla de Pascua antes de la pandemia. Un panorama que claramente ha cambiado en estos últimos 2 años, porque Rapanui aún no se reabre para los vuelos comerciales, lo que ha provocado una potente crisis. El desempleo bordea el 60% y los precios de los alimentos se han ido a las nubes.
Now, a lot of rebellious people before the pandemic came, they were really going for independence. Oh, we don't want tourism, we want independence. But during the pandemic it showed, because a lot of these people subsistence, so they live off the land, they farm. You can see some of these cows around the place. But if there's no tourism on the island, the people don't have money to buy your crops. They don't have money to buy the cows and the food. And so everyone was just stagnating. There was no movement forward. And so even the rebellious people by the end were happy to open the island, and after having 3 years kind of without tourism, we're just enjoying the people right now.
Although many like Marc on the island directly profit from high levels of tourism, it doesn't come without its own set of problems.
Nosotros queremos más turistas, obvio, pero ¿hasta qué punto? Entra y sale, pero para esta población flotante hay que tener capacidad en los hoteles, en los restaurantes, en las calles, y eso es basura, agua. Ya se habla que en el verano del 2019-2020 se llegó al pic de la cantidad de turistas en la isla, ¿ya? En donde teníamos 14 vuelos semanales con full turistas y con 2 o 3 cruceros mensuales de 500, 1000, 2000 personas bajando. Nosotros queremos más turismo, pero también hay un límite. Y ese límite hay que manejarlo bien.
La isla vive serios problemas que la tienen en riesgo de saturación. Basura, playas contaminadas, exceso de autos y casas son resultado del explosivo crecimiento de su población.
Según un estudio de carga demográfica de la Universidad Católica, la gran cantidad de gente que vive y la visita le está pasando la cuenta.
Besides being considered a local community leader, Ariki is a board member of the National Parks Directorship. As well as a more ambivalent view of the impact of tourism on the island, he is also one of the many worried about the influences of those migrating from mainland Chile.
Que hay mucha más gente que no conocemos, ¿cierto? Hay muchas costumbres que van ingresando, que algunas buenas y muchas malas, ¿cierto? Se vino hablando de muchos años el tema de la inmigración. Ahí la gente empezó a decir, nosotros mismos, ya no vemos al Rapanui en la calle. Tú podías caminar libremente día y noche y sin ningún peligro, sin ningún... éramos, cada persona que uno veía en la calle era un tío, un familiar o alguien conocido. Cada inmigrante en la isla en los años 90, tú sabías quién era. Hoy en día no. Si bien todo este cambio cultural de las culturas de afuera que ha ingresado ha tenido su lado bueno y ha tenido también su lado malo. Y el lado malo, la mayor parte fue en este intento de erradicar el idioma y la cultura rapanui. El sistema es un sistema nacional chileno, ¿cierto?
In all corners of the world, governments have adopted assimilation policies with the aim of creating homogeneous national identities. Here, it seemed, was no different, with limited land rights, self-governance, or sane-school curriculum of the island's youths. Some islanders, though, are fighting back against this.
Vamos a Honga Areo. Honga Areo es la escuela, el jardín que se maneja en el idioma Rapanui. Es uno de los lugares que se busca en preservar el idioma Rapanui, pero también la cultura, la historia de Rapanui también. Entonces esto se enseña desde una muy temprana edad.
Hongaroa is the only school of its kind on the island. The staff and parents of the children that attend it have all made the decision to prioritise the preservation of the culture and, most importantly, the language. Upon Tahira's arrival, it was clear that the environment had fostered a strong sense of community.
Moku te me hopea o te parera o te hauha te me ni here aroto i te reo te ngā poki angiangia ni te raua amu te me hanga mātou i roto i te honga nei tapu te reo te haura ina he rua reo wānanga i roto nei he reo Rapanui mauna te tumu te me nei haka hio hio he ngā roa e te ngā poki i te reo Rapanui na kuia te
Mo oku pai te reo Rapanui he aringa o oku, he haka ara o mātou o te Rapanui, o ira mo oku hanga o mo hapipa e mo ite o tāku poki ko I haka, mo korero o te reo Rapanui, ina he haka ara Rapanui. O ira u hangai mo ite o ona I te reo Rapanui, ko ngā poki nei takoa, mo maupa ia mua I te reo Rapanui.
During what was one of my favourite experiences on the island, I couldn't help but reflect on the weight of the preservation of Rapanui's culture resting in the hands of these children. And in an ever more connected world, I found myself considering the disadvantages of spending your earliest and most important developmental years engaged in a language that the world's market doesn't value. The community's desire to distance themselves from Chilean cultural dominance, though, seemed too strong of a pull. A notion I was reminded of by the school's cleaner as I packed up to leave.
Sí, obvio.
A veces dicen la gente, tú eres chilena, claro, soy chilena por mi territorio chileno, pero no soy chilena,
Sí.
soy polinésica.
Sí.
Yo soy de Rapanui.
Sí.
Entonces, hay gente como que no entiende eso.
Like Estella, the sense of a necessity to preserve and separate the Rapanui culture from that of its governing authority is one that ran through everybody I spoke to during my time on the island. In their own ways, there are many individuals and groups doing their bit to champion their roots. One of those, Man and Moai, had invited me to rehearsals ahead of one of their famous cultural performances.
La razón por la que tenemos el grupo, hacemos presentaciones artísticas, es porque es nuestra manera de aportar a nuestra cultura, la manera de aportar a nuestra tierra, preservando las tradiciones. Nosotros quiero que cada uno de ellos se convierta en un embajador y algún día en un profesor o un maestro de estas disciplinas, de distintos conocimientos y saberes ancestrales de Rapanui, para que ellos enseñen a los jóvenes, enseñen a los niños, y de aquí a 100, 200, 300 años más se mantenga esta cadena andando y podamos conectar con las siguientes generaciones, aprendiendo de afuera, pero jamás perdiendo nuestra identidad, porque lo que viene de afuera se ve bonito, se ve lindo, se ve atractivo, pero lo que llena aquí el corazón es lo que va más allá de los materiales, más allá de lo físico. Y damos gracias de que nuestros ancestros hayan dado tanto de ellos para sobrevivir a la conquista, a las enfermedades, y aunque hay en un momento que he dado 111 Rapanui, hoy en día hemos logrado prosperar. Si bien está muy pronto a perderse porque hay mucha influencia, el sueño es que los Rapanui de 100 años más sigan manteniendo su corazón y su identidad viva. Y por eso hacemos lo que nosotros hacemos.
As the night unfolded, my thoughts circled back to the conversation I shared with Ariki. While Ariki recognised the positive impact of tourism, Chilean immigration and multiculturalism, his deep connection to the island's history left him wary of external forces. And who could blame him? The outside world has consistently let Rapanui down, exploiting both the land and its people. Yes, tourism and Chilean immigration is necessary for economic growth beyond mere subsistence, but at what cost? Is the erosion of a rich and genuinely unique culture worth it? Although poignant, the erosion of language and culture remains conceptual, existing only in our interpretation of the social environment. In the case of the island's ecosystem, however, the signs of impact are already becoming apparent.
Next, we conclude our series on the growing plastic problem to a tiny island in the South Pacific that is increasingly dealing with more and more of the world's trash.
Bueno, aquí bajo de este galpón es un sector donde acoplan el residuo costero. Podemos observar cordeles, restos de bandejas, diferentes tipos de residuos que se generan con el espinel, la pesca industrial que se da en el exterior, no en Rapanui, pero todo ese residuo que queda en el mar llega para acá. Hay más plumaví y hay algunos cajones con residuos. Eso quiere decir que no es tan antiguo, es hace poco nomás.
Haimiti went on to say that everything we could see under the shed wasn't in fact years or months worth of waste, but just a few weeks. Along with the world's trash washing up on Rapa Nui, there's also the longer-term, much deeper concern of a rapidly changing climate.
The Moai, which have stood here proudly for so long, are facing a threat bigger than them. Rising sea levels are accelerating erosion along the coast, where so many of these statues stand guard.
With climate change, the storms are stronger, which means stronger storm surge. With more storminess, more intense rainfall, even more droughts and exposure to the elements in general, the statues will weather faster.
El año recién pasado llegó una tormenta fuerte y se pudo observar el derrumbe del lago. Entonces eso quiere decir que si bien van a ir pasando los años, el cambio climático y el calentamiento global van a empezar a aumentar, el nivel del mar va a empezar a aumentar mucho más y podemos llegar a un futuro a que, por ejemplo, mis hijos tal vez no conozcan la arqueología que hubo en algún momento alrededor de la costa de todo Rapanui. Está pasando, mi mamá me ha contado historias de lugares que ya no.
Throughout my time with Haimiti and the environmental team, I got to understand the delicacy of the ecosystem. When you only have 63 square miles at your disposal, any decrease or shift in conditions can prove a whole lot more consequential. More tourists and immigration equals more rubbish and demand for fresh water. An escalating global warming crisis equals higher sea levels, desalination of arable land, and longer droughts. Globalization and an ever-increasing commercial fishing industry introduces unwanted plastics and debris. With history and all external factors considered, it's no wonder there's been a desire for separatism and an air of hostility towards the outside world by some of the islanders for many years now.
Y una isla no deberíamos tener un vertedero, porque ya tenemos contaminadas las napas por mucha sobrepoblación. Y no todos los recursos, los recursos que había o que hay en la isla es para la gente que vive en la isla. Resulta que ha entrado mucha gente de afuera a vivir en la isla. Y eso es lo que ha hecho que haya más basura, más contaminación. Antes, cuando éramos muy pocos en la isla, el vertedero era pequeño.
One interaction after another, it was clear to me that both individually and as a community, the Rapanui felt a sense of responsibility to protect and preserve the essence of the island. Policy, litigation and campaigning play their part, but perhaps my favourite medium for this is art. To explore that, I had one last man to meet, owner of the world's most remote tattoo parlour, Ataranga.
conservar la cultura es todo. No hay que dejar de la lengua, el canto, los bailes y como también los diseños. Y ahí eso trato también yo de siempre conservar y de demostrar siempre a los que más vienen ahora que lo que tenemos es muy valioso. Que casi no todo el mundo tiene esta joya o este privilegio de poder tener este hermoso lugar, hermoso espacio, hermosa cultura también. Hubo mucho cuando se cortó los vuelos hacia acá se cortaron y no entraron turistas, la isla fue cayendo muy de a poco. Bueno, y eso también es una enseñanza de que la isla también es vivir del turismo, porque sin el turismo no hay. Dicen algunos que igual podemos vivir del pescado y todo eso, todo bien, que antiguamente igual vivíamos de eso. No, eso no entiendo si es verdad.
Ataranga, for me, epitomised the average islander here. Proud of his heritage and doing his bit to support and preserve it, but rational. Realistic about the fate of the island and its bittersweet relationship with external forces. Although the term independence is often used in the media, it seems what they truly desire is autonomy. Autonomy over food, policy, and borders. A sense of control, free from reliance on an outside world that has historically exploited them. As my time on the island came to a close, I left with mixed feelings. Perhaps I should recognise that cultural evolution is natural, occurring time and time again throughout history, but the attachment that I'd grown to the people, the aura, and the history of the island meant I felt that, like in many other cases across the world, the dilution of its culture and the degradation of its land is a modern-day travesty unfolding right before our eyes.
Thank you so much. If you're listening to me speak now, then you made it very far into what was already a very long video, so I really do appreciate you sticking around. Hopefully you did so because you took something from it or found it interesting. These pieces take an insanely long time to put together, a very large expense, so for now they're very much a labour of love. But what motivates me to continue producing them is if I hear people maybe learned something from them or just generally enjoyed them. So if you did, then please do let me know, and maybe do some of the algorithmically beneficial things like the video and subscribe if you've got a YouTube account, that kind of thing. But mainly I want to say thank you so much for making it this far. And of course, thank you to everybody that helped in the production of this documentary, helped it come together. I really do appreciate it. So thank you very much.